time to bring you up to speed with what's happening globally and in Nigeria. With the incessant killings in Israel and Gaza, WHO says Gaza hospitals on brink. Still on Gaza, Israel fight. Israel's white phosphorus endangers Gaza. Lebanon, HRW says. Israel instructs 1.1 million Gaza residents southward. U.S. Commission urges readiness for China-Russia wars, and Australia's Indigenous Voice for NAS. On Israel-Gaza war, the World Health Organization, WHO, has called for quick humanitarian access to the Gaza Strip, cautioning Israel's blockade and bombardment have left the enclave's health system at breaking point, noting Gaza's overstrained hospitals that only a few hours of electricity a day, with fuel being rationed to maintain their services, including intensive care and X-ray and dialysis services. The United Nations Health Agency called for the opening of humanitarian corridor to let health workers into the territory, as well as the evacuation of the sick and wounded. It says shortages of medical supplies were also severe, and that time was running out to stop a humanitarian disaster in a territory that is home to over 2 million people. The agency said in a statement late on Thursday that without the immediate entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, especially health services, medical supplies, food, clean water, fuel and non-food items, humanitarian and health partners will be unable to respond to urgent needs of people who desperately need it. Each lost hour puts more lives at risk. The international community of the Red Cross, ICRC, also raised concern about the deteriorating situation in Gaza, describing the situation as abhorrent. Fabrizio Carboni, the regional director for the Near and Middle East for the ICRC, said in a statement on Friday, as Gaza loses power, hospitals lose power, putting newborns in incubators and elderly patients on oxygen at risk. Kidney dialysis jobs and X-rays can be taken without electricity. Hospitals risk turning into morgues. Israel has said it has dropped closely 6,000 bombs in Gaza since it began its bombardment almost a week ago, following an attack by the Hamas group that caught its security forces off guard and killed more than 1,300 Israelis. No fewer than 1,500 Palestinians have been killed in the subsequent onslaught and thousands more injured as Israel prepares for a possible ground assault on the enclave. Gaza has about 30 hospitals, 13 of them operated by the Ministry of Health and others privately run. The WHO said it had documented 34 attacks on healthcare services in Gaza since Saturday. By yesterday, 11 WHO health workers had been killed while 16 were injured. Another 5 ICRC workers were killed. The WHO said 20 ambulances had also been hit. Still staying with Israel and Gaza conflict, Human Rights Watch has said following an analysis of video of the conflict, Israel has used white phosphorus in its continuing military operations in Gaza and Lebanon, putting civilians at grave risk. Human Rights Watch said it verified footage taken in Lebanon and Gaza on Tuesday and Wednesday respectively, showing numerous uses of artillery-fired white phosphorus over the Gaza City port and 2 rural locations along the Israel-Lebanon border. Human Rights Watch also spoke to 2 people who described an attack in Gaza, the rights group said. HRW said the use of white phosphorus in densely populated areas violates Israel's obligation under international law to take all visible precautions to avoid harm to civilians. Anytime that white phosphorus is used in crowded civilian areas, it poses a high risk of excruciating burns and lifelong suffering, Lama Faki, HRW's director for the Middle East and North Africa, said in a statement on Wednesday. White phosphorus is unlawfully indiscriminate when airbursts in populated urban areas where it can burn down houses and cause egregious harm to civilians. Israel should ban all use of airburst white phosphorus munitions in populated areas without exception, the right group said, noting the availability of non-lethal alternatives. White phosphorus can cause bone-deep burns resulting in death or lifelong injuries, can be used to generate smoke screens, mark targets, and incinerate enemy targets. While the use of the substance in war zones is not banned outright under international law, use near civilians is prohibited under the United Nations Convention on Conventional Weapons, to which Israel is not a signatory. but Israel's military was quoted according to reports saying it was currently not aware of the use of weapons containing white phosphorus in Gaza. Officials did not provide comment on the alleged use of the chemical in Lebanon. Reports said Israel used white phosphorus extensively during its bombardment of Gaza in 2009, drawing widespread condemnation. Still with Israel and Gaza war, Israel's army has ordered the evacuation of all civilians living in Gaza City and in the north of the Gaza Strip ahead of a dreaded ground offensive on the besieged enclave. On Friday, the directive came on the heels of what the United Nations said was a warning they received from Israel to evacuate 1.1 million people living in the north of Gaza within 24 hours. The order, which comes on the seventh day of a war total blockade declared by Israel following an unprecedented Hamas invasion and deadly raid, directs residents of Gaza City to flee deeper south into the Gaza Strip, a narrow coastal territory that is home to about 2.3 million people. Israel's directive charged that Hamas fighters were hiding in tunnels under Gaza City. This evacuation is for your own safety, the Israeli military said in a warning it said was sent to Gaza City civilians. They will be able to return to Gaza City only when another announcement permitting it is made. Do not approach the area of the security fence with the state of Israel, it added in a statement. In the following days, the Israeli army will continue to operate significantly in Gaza City and make extensive efforts to avoid harming civilians, it warned. Over 1,500 people, around half of them children and women, have been killed in relentless Israeli bombardments on Gaza since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th in a surprise operation that killed over 1,300 people in Israel. Away from Israel-Gaza war, now the United States must increase its military modernization to improve its conventional and nuclear forces and make sure it is prepared for the possibility of simultaneous wars with China and Russia, a congressional commission evaluating the U.S.'s strategic posture has said. Releasing its report PDF on Thursday in the U.S., the Congressional Commission on the Strategic Posture of the United States described the present global environment as fundamentally different to anything experienced in the past, even in the darkest days of the Cold War. The bipartisan panel of 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans called for urgent and quick action to tackle the threat facing the U.S. Their reports follow a Young-led review of U.S. conventional and nuclear forces and comes 14 years after the last major review was published in 2009. Commission Chair Madeleine Creedon and Vice Chair John Keel wrote in their introduction to the report, "Today, the United States is on the cusp of having not one but 2 nuclear pair adversaries, each with ambitions to change the international status quo by force if necessary, a situation which the United States do not anticipate and for which it is not prepared." The Commission added that while the risk of a major nuclear conflict remained low, the risk of military conflict with either or both Russia and China, while not inevitable, has grown, and with it the risk of nuclear use, possibly against the U.S. homeland. It noted the advances in air and missile defense made by Russia and China and accepted a forecast from the Pentagon that China was likely to have 1,500 nuclear warheads by 2035. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said last year that China posed the most serious long-term challenge to the international order and that Washington would follow a strategy of invest, align and compete to address the challenge. Among its recommendations, the Commission said Washington should fully and urgently execute the nuclear weapons modernization program that began in 2010 and is expected to take 30 years. It said the project should be expanded to include all warheads, nuclear delivery systems, and nuclear command, control, and communications. Other recommendations included deploying more tactical nuclear weapons in Asia and Europe, the production of more B-21 stealth bombers and Columbia-class nuclear submarines, and better use of emerging technology such as hypersonics and AI. The report also called for enhancements to the conventional forces of the U.S. and its allies. The panel noted how much the situation had deteriorated since 2009, when the security environment had improved and China was considered a lesser included case. The challenges are unmistakable, the problems are urgent, the steps are needed now, the report said. Meanwhile, on Saturday, Australians will go to the polls in a historic referendum that will determine if Indigenous people are recognized in the country's constitution through a new parliamentary advisory board. Victory for the Yes campaign will ensure the establishment of the Voice to Parliament, which will allow representatives of First Nations communities to provide independent advice to lawmakers on issues that affect them. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were Australia's first inhabitants, but they have been largely marginalized since colonization by the British in 1788. There are now more than 980,000 Indigenous people living in Australia, making up roughly 3.8% of the population at the last count in 2021. First Nations people are the most disadvantaged in Australia, with a life expectancy that is about 80 years less than non-Indigenous people. They also suffer from higher rates of suicide and imprisonment and have less access to healthcare services. Saturday's referendum was one of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's major policy pledges during his successful election campaign last year. But the build-up to the vote has stirred divisions in Australia, with reports of racism and abuse triggered by rampant misinformation on social media. Dani Linda, a Bunjalung Kungarankna woman and senior lecturer of law at the University of Queensland, said they Indigenous people are definitely feeling depressed and a sense of distress because the racism has completely hardened within Australia. Elections have consistently placed the no vote ahead, with experts pointing to a lack of bipartisan support from lawmakers. It has left some from the Indigenous community feeling dismayed. Here are more stories. In Tunisia's rally in support with Palestinians. On Thursday, several of trade unionists, civil society representatives, political activists, lawyers, and high school students demonstrated in the center of Tunis in support of the Palestinian people and called for the criminalization of any normalization of relations with Israel. Denouncing the Israel attacks against the Gaza Strip, the demonstrators brandishing the Palestinian flag assembled in front of the headquarters of the Trade Union Center, the UGTT, before marching to Avenue Habib Bourguiba, the major thoroughfare in the city center, report said. The people want to penalize normalization with Israel, chanted the demonstrators, angry at Zionist crimes and international silence on the genocide in Gaza, the Palestinian enclave. The protesters also denounced the support of France and the United States for Israel, which had become allies in the attack on the Palestinians. Israel has been carrying out strikes against the Gaza Strip since Saturday in reaction to an unprecedented air, land and sea assault launched by the Hamas fighters. The offensive unveiled by the Palestinian Islamist movement resulted in the deaths of at least 1,200 Israelis and foreigners, while the Israeli response in the Palestinian enclave killed over 1,300 people, mostly civilians, and caused widespread destruction. Tunisia is getting ready for a health and humanitarian aid caravan for the Palestinians in Gaza. In the North African country, which hosted Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, from 1982 to 1994, after he left Lebanon, has always taken a firm stance in support of the Palestinian cause. President Kais Saied on Monday called for support for our brothers in the stage of Palestinian liberation when he received members of the government. On Tuesday, at the initiative of the Ministry of Education, pupils saluted the Palestinian flag. President Saied, in his speeches, has repeatedly described normalization with Israel as a crime, and a parliamentary committee will shortly be examining a bill to penalize such a process. In October 1985, the Israeli Air Force carried out a massive bombing of the PLO headquarters at Hamon-Chat, 25 kilometers south of Tunis, killing 50 Palestinians and 18 Tunisians. Among the victims was a major aim of the operation, Abu Jihad, an official of Asifa, the military wing of Fatah. Still on the news on economy, IMF World Bank says urgent reform needed. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund IMF returned to Africa for their Marrakesh meeting under the banner of reform and climate financing, 50 years after holding their last annual meetings on the continent. Expectedly, Africa was at the heart of several of the discussions, confronted as it is by a debt crunch affecting several of the continent's countries, the consequences of global warming, and poverty that is being reduced at a slower pace than elsewhere. at a time when the Bretton Woods institutions are facing a growing chorus of criticism over the underrepresentation of the poorest countries in the decision-making processes. The IMF and the World Bank have announced plans to grant Africa additional seats on their boards. In Nigeria, agriculture is demonstrating its astonishing potential for creating businesses and jobs. Demand for aquatic food is high in Africa's most populous country, where fish accounts for 37% of animal protein intake. In recent analysis of the Nigerian catfish sector by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations showed just how important it is, estimating the value of annual catfish production at some 2.6 billion US dollars. With the Fish for ACP program, the FAO and its partners have set themselves a goal to improve the sector's productivity and competitiveness in order to make catfish farming more sustainable in both socio-economic and environmental terms. A recent report by the Kenya Association of Manufacturers revealed that the leather industry is one of the oldest and most resilient sectors of the Kenyan economy. However, it is underperforming and has gone from being a net producer of foreign currency to a net consumer of foreign currency. Industry players have urged the government to introduce policies to stimulate growth, but the results have been inconclusive. A month ago, the government promised to limit imports of finished leather products, but professionals remain skeptical. We take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll bring you more stories from Nigeria. Do stay with us. You're welcome back. Stories from Nigeria here says Tinubu rejects Atiku's allegations, appeals dismissal. President Bola Tinubu has requested that the Supreme Court should dismiss and appeal the candidate of the People's Democratic Party (PDP), Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, filed to nullify his election victory. Tinubu was represented by a team of 17 lawyers consisting of 10 senior advocates of Nigeria's sons. He urged the Apex Court to affirm what he termed as well-considered decision of the Court of Appeal, which, while sitting as the Presidential Election Petition Court (PEPC) had on September 6th, dismissed the joint petition that Atiku and his party entered against him in a 42-page brief of argument, insisting that he was validly returned by the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) as the winner of the presidential poll that held on February 25th. Tinubu told the Apex Court that by statistics, he gathered 25% of the total vote in 29 states of the Federation. He told the court that the ex-vice president and the PDP only managed to secure 25% of the total vote in 21 states of the Federation, as against the constitutional requirement of 24.7 states, which is the mathematical result of 2/3 of the 36 states of the Federation and the Federal Capital Territory, making 37. Tinubu maintained that having secured the highest number of valid votes cast and having fulfilled all constitutional requirements in that regard, INEC had no option than to declare him as the winner of the presidential contest. He told the Supreme Court that Atiku and the PDP, being dissatisfied with the outcome of the election on March 21st, approached the PEPC on trumped all allegations of non-compliance with provisions of the Electoral Act 2022, corrupt practices, non-scoring of majority of lawful votes cast at the election, and non-qualification of the respondent. President Tinubu's reply came just 3 days after Atiku and the PDP applied for permission of the Supreme Court to tender fresh evidence to create the allegation that he submitted forged documents to the INEC. Precisely, Atiku sought the leave of the court to tender Tinubu's academic records, which he said were handed over to him by the Chicago State University CSU on October 2nd, 2023. In the process, he filed to counter Atiku's appeal. However, President Tinubu stated that the hyperbolic character of the foregoing allegations was exposed by the petition itself, which had no facts in support thereof. He told the Supreme Court that Atiku and his party failed to explain what they meant by constitutional threshold till all the respondents in the matter were done with filing of the answers to the petition. And finally, on the news on economic matters, CBN removes forex ban on 43 items. With immediate effect, the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has lifted the forex ban on 43 items. The CBN also promised to intervene in the FX market from time to time to boost liquidity. The Central Bank of Nigeria had regulated the items from accessing forex from the investors and exporters I&E windows in 2015, saying they were not valid for foreign exchange and could be produced in the country. Some of the affected items include rice, cement, palm kernel, meat and processed meat products, poultry, soap, and cosmetics. The CBN's Director of Corporate Communications, Isa Abdul Mumin, said in a statement on Thursday the ban was lifted to further promote economic growth and development. The Central Bank of Nigeria will continue to promote orderliness and professional conduct by all participants in the Nigerian foreign exchange market to ensure market forces determine exchange rates on a willing buyer, willing seller principle, he added. The Central Bank of Nigeria also reiterated that the prevailing FX rates should be referenced from platforms such as the CBN website, FMDCQ, and other recognized or appointed trading systems. The CBN's decision to lift the forex ban on 43 items is anticipated to improve economic activity and increase the availability of goods in the market. It could also lead to a decline in the prices of some goods, as importers will now be able to access FX at the official exchange rate. The CBN's intervention in the FX market is also likely to assist stabilize the naira and lessen volatility. This will create a more conducive environment for businesses to operate and attract foreign investment. To refresh our memories, WHO says Gaza hospitals on brink. Israel's white phosphorus endangers Gaza, Lebanon. HRW says Israel instructs 1.1 million Gaza residents southward. U.S. Commission urges readiness for China-Russia wars, and Australia's Indigenous Voice vote. Yes, that's all on the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.